The invitation was a masterpiece of calligraphy and understated elegance, its thick, cream-colored cardstock whispering of a budget most people could only dream of. Isabella and Liam, it announced in swirling gold letters. It had been on my mantelpiece for 3 months, a constant reminder of the wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of my best friend's life. My best friend. The words felt strange on my tongue, like a coat that no longer fit quite right. Isabella and I had been entwined since childhood, our lives a tapestry of shared secrets, sleepovers, and scraped knees. We were the kind of friends who could finish each other's sentences, who knew the other's coffee order by heart, and who had promised, with all the solemnity of 10-year-old girls, to be each other's maids of honor. But as we grew, a subtle thread of rivalry began to weave itself into our bond. It was never spoken, of course. It was in the lingering glance she'd give my date at a party, the backhanded compliment about a promotion I'd earned, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when something wonderful happened to me. I was the quiet one, the observer, content with my books and my small circle of genuine connections. Isabella was the star, a dazzling comet who drew everyone into her orbit. She thrived on attention, on being the center of every story, the most beautiful woman in every room. I had long accepted my role as her supporting actress, the steady, reliable moon to her blazing sun. I loved her, I truly did, but sometimes standing in her shadow felt cold. When she announced her engagement to Liam, a kind and handsome man who looked at her as if she'd single-handedly hung the stars in the sky, I was genuinely happy for her. I threw them an engagement party, spent hours listening to her debate the merits of peonies versus roses, and held her hand while she cried over a seating chart dispute. The maid of honor role, however, went to her sister, a decision she'd explained with a breezy, "You know how family is, Elle. But you're my spiritual maid of honor, which is way more important." I'd smiled and nodded, burying the familiar sting of being relegated to a supporting role once again. About a month before the wedding, with the day looming, I realized the dress code wasn't specified on the invitation. I sent her a quick text. "Hey, so excited for the big day. I was just wondering about the dress code. Don't want to mess it up." Her reply came almost instantly, accompanied by a string of cheerful emojis. "OMG, Elle, I am so glad you asked. I forgot to tell you. I'm doing something a little different, a bit avant-garde. I want it to be a white wedding, a symbol of purity and new beginnings, you know? I'm asking all the guests to wear white. The whole place will look so heavenly and cohesive in the photos." I blinked at my phone. A white-themed wedding where all the guests wore white? It was unusual, certainly. It felt bold. It felt very Isabella. "Wow, really? The whole guest list?" I texted back, a flicker of uncertainty stirring in me. "Yes. Isn't it a divine idea? A sea of white celebrating our love? Please find the most beautiful white dress you can. I want you to look stunning." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and my doubts dissolved. It was her day, her vision. If she wanted a sea of white, then a sea of white she would get. The request felt like a strange sort of honor, an elevation from just another guest to part of her grand aesthetic vision. The hunt for the dress became my mission. I spent a weekend boutique hopping, dismissing anything that felt too casual or, conversely, too bridal. I wanted something elegant and sophisticated. I finally found it in a small, independent shop I'd never been to before. It was a floor-length, off-the-shoulder gown made of a heavy, luxurious crepe that hugged my figure before flaring out slightly at the bottom. It was simple, yet breathtaking. It was also, admittedly, very expensive, but Isabella had told me to find the most beautiful dress I could. Just to be safe, I snapped a picture of myself in it and sent it to her. "Found the one! What do you think? Is it too much?" Her response was another rapid-fire burst of excitement. "Elle, it's perfect! Oh, you look like a goddess. It's exactly what I pictured. Buy it immediately. We're going to look so beautiful on the day. You in that, me in mine. It's going to be iconic." Her validation was the final push I needed. I bought the dress, my heart swelling with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't a competition. This was me, her oldest friend, honoring her wishes and being a part of her perfect day. The iciness in her shadow seemed to melt away. We were a team. On the morning of the wedding, I laid the dress out on my bed. It looked like a pool of liquid moonlight. I spent hours on my hair and makeup, a soft, romantic look that complemented the gown's elegance. As I zipped up the dress, I felt a flutter of pure, unadulterated excitement. I felt beautiful. I felt confident. I couldn't wait to see the look on Isabella's face when she saw how seriously I had taken her vision, how much I was supporting her. I couldn't wait to celebrate with my best friend. Stepping out of the car and onto the manicured gravel path of the sprawling vineyard estate, I took a deep breath. The late afternoon sun was golden, casting a magical glow over the rows of grapevines. Other guests were walking ahead of me, a river of dark suits and jewel-toned dresses. Blues, greens, reds, blacks, a kaleidoscope of rich, formal color. Not a single one of them was in white. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach. My steps slowed. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It had to be a mistake. Maybe the guests for the outdoor ceremony were different. Maybe the white rule was just for the inner circle, the evening reception. The excuses tumbled through my mind, each one more flimsy than the last. But the evidence was right there, in the sea of vibrant color all around me. I was the only one. A solitary beacon of white in a world of color. And I was wearing a white gown, to a wedding. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Every cheerful chat, every burst of laughter from the other guests seemed to mock me. My beautiful, perfect dress suddenly felt like a costume, a garish beacon of social suicide. I was a ghost at a feast, a glaring mistake in a perfectly composed picture. My breath hitched, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might be sick right there on the pristine gravel. My first instinct was to run, to turn around, get back in my car, and drive away as fast as I could. I could feign a sudden illness, a family emergency, anything. But my feet felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mixture of humiliation and a burgeoning white-hot anger. Isabella's text replayed in my mind. I'm asking all the guests to wear white. A sea of white celebrating our love. It's perfect. Oh, you look like a goddess. Was this some kind of colossal, cruel joke? Had she texted the wrong instructions only to me? The thought was so malicious, so deeply hurtful, that my mind initially rejected it. This was Isabella, my childhood friend. She was competitive, yes. She loved the spotlight, absolutely. But she wasn't deliberately malevolent. Was she? As I forced myself to walk forward, my posture rigid with shame, the whispers started. They were subtle at first, a murmur that rippled through the well-dressed crowd as I passed. I could feel their eyes on me, 100 pinpricks of curiosity, confusion, and pity. I saw a woman lean over to her husband, her hand covering her mouth as she spoke, her gaze fixed on me. I saw a group of men in sharp tuxedos fall silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. I tried to hold my head high, to project an air of confidence I was a million miles from feeling. I focused on the ornate wooden doors at the end of the path that led to the ceremony hall, my face a mask of serene indifference while my insides churned with liquid fire. An older woman, one of Isabella's aunts whom I vaguely recognized, gave me a look of such profound sympathy that it almost broke me. She patted my arm as I passed her. "Oh, you poor dear," she murmured, her voice laced with genuine concern. There must have been a terrible misunderstanding. That simple act of kindness was my undoing. The dam of my composure cracked, and a single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, my fingers trembling. The word echoed in my head. Misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a lie. A calculated, deliberate lie. The anger was back, stronger now, eclipsing the shame. Why? Why would she do this? I finally reached the large oak doors, which were propped open, revealing the breathtaking scene inside. The hall was a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses and lilies cascaded from the ceiling, their scent filling the air. An orchestra played softly in a corner. The aisle was a carpet of white petals, and at the end of it, standing under a magnificent floral arch, was Liam. He looked impossibly handsome, his face alight with a nervous, ecstatic joy. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching, no doubt, for his bride. As I stepped inside, the music faltered for a half-second. A collective gasp, soft but audible, swept through the hall. Every head turned towards me. If I had been a spectacle outside, I was a catastrophe inside. Here, in this cathedral of white flowers, against the backdrop of her meticulously planned decor, my white gown was no longer just a faux pas. It was an assault. It was a challenge. It looked, to all intents and purposes, like I was the one about to walk down the aisle. Liam's smile faltered, his brow furrowing in confusion as his eyes met mine. He looked from me to the empty aisle and back to me, his expression a question mark of pure bewilderment. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I found an empty seat at the very back, sinking into it and trying to become invisible. I wished I could melt into the polished wood, but there was no hiding. I was the spectacle, the pre-ceremony entertainment. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. Who is she? Can you believe the nerve? Is she an ex-girlfriend? The last question hit me like a physical blow. They thought I was here to cause a scene, to object, to ruin the wedding. And in a way, through no fault of my own, I was. And then, the orchestra swelled, shifting into the familiar, triumphant notes of the bridal march. The entire congregation rose to their feet and turned towards the entrance. My heart stopped. This was it, the moment of truth. Through the doors, Isabella appeared on the arm of her father, and as she glided into the hall, a radiant smile fixed on her face. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She was wearing my dress. Not a similar dress, not a dress in the same style. It was the exact same gown, the same off-the-shoulder cut, the same luxurious crepe fabric that draped and flowed in the exact same way. The dress I had texted her a picture of from the boutique. The dress she had called perfect and urged me to buy. She had seen it, loved it, and then, with a level of treachery that took my breath away, she had bought it for herself and lied to ensure I would show up wearing it too. I stood there, frozen in a sea of standing guests, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity, the premeditated cruelty of it all. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a trap, a carefully laid snare to humiliate me on the most important day of her life. She hadn't wanted a supporting actress. She had wanted a villain. She had cast me as the crazy, attention-seeking friend who tried to upstage the bride, and she had done it so skillfully that everyone here would believe it. Her eyes, sparkling with triumph, scanned the crowd and found mine. For a fleeting second, across the heads of all her adoring guests, our gazes locked, and on her perfectly made-up face, I saw it. A flicker of a smile, a tiny, self-satisfied smirk that was meant only for me. It was a confirmation, a confession, and a declaration of victory. For a long moment, the world seemed to warp and fade, the sounds of the orchestra blurring into a dull, distant roar in my ears. The only thing in sharp focus was Isabella, my best friend, gliding down the aisle in my dress, her face a mask of radiant joy that was so complete, so utterly convincing, that it made the treachery underneath feel 1,000 times more vile. The sight was so surreal, so brazen, that my mind simply couldn't hold on to the anger. It was replaced by a hollow, ringing numbness. I sank back into my seat, a puppet with its strings cut. The guests around me, having fulfilled their duty of turning to watch the bride, now faced forward, their attention on the altar. I was forgotten again, a temporary oddity, now eclipsed by the main event, and I was grateful for it. I needed the darkness of the back row. I needed the anonymity. The ceremony began. The officiant, a man with a kind face and a gentle voice, spoke of love, of trust, of the sacred bond of friendship that supports a marriage. Each word was a poisoned dart. He spoke of honesty and vulnerability, and I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from letting out a hysterical laugh. I watched Isabella and Liam at the altar. They held hands. They gazed into each other's eyes. Liam's adoration was plain to see. It was pure and unconditional. He had no idea. He was marrying a phantom, a beautifully constructed illusion. My mind, detached from the scene in front of me, began to spiral backward in time, collecting and re-examining moments from our friendship like a detective at a crime scene. Every memory was now tainted, viewed through the lens of this final, spectacular betrayal. The time she'd accidentally told my high school crush I wasn't interested in him, the way she'd borrowed my favorite necklace and lost it, only for me to see it in her jewelry box months later. The constant, subtle digs at my career, my boyfriends, my choices, all delivered with a sweet smile that dared me to take offense. I had always dismissed these things as thoughtlessness, as part of her self-absorbed nature. I had made excuses for her. But now I saw the pattern. It wasn't carelessness, it was calculation. It was a long, slow campaign to keep me in my place, to ensure I never outshone her, not even for a moment. This wedding, this dress, it wasn't just a cruel prank. It was her masterpiece, the grand finale of a lifetime of quiet sabotage. She hadn't just wanted to be the most beautiful woman in the room. She needed me to be the most humiliated. She needed to prove once and for all that she was the winner and I was the loser. Isabella read her vows, her voice thick with perfectly timed emotion. A tear, glistening like a diamond, rolled down her cheek as she promised Liam her eternal loyalty and honesty. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. The entire hall was captivated. I saw people dabbing their eyes, moved by her performance. Only I knew the truth. Only I could see the actress beneath the bridal veil. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, and Liam kissed her, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. I remained seated, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my knuckles white. I couldn't bring myself to clap. I couldn't celebrate this union, this monument to a lie. My stillness was a silent scream of protest that no one but me could hear. As the triumphant couple made their way back up the aisle, beaming at their cheering guests, Isabella's eyes found mine again. The victorious smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of something else. Annoyance? Impatience? It was the look of a director whose actress was refusing to follow the script. The script said I should have been long gone by now, having fled in a flood of tears and shame. My presence, my stillness, my refusal to be broken. It was an improvisation she hadn't accounted for. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The numbness receded, the shame evaporated, and what was left was not the hot, chaotic anger from before, but something colder, heavier, and far more resolute. It was the calm that comes after the storm has passed, leaving behind a landscape of utter clarity. The guests began to stand and file out, heading towards the cocktail hour on the grand terrace. This was my chance to disappear. I could slip out the side door, and no one would notice or care. It was the sensible thing to do. It was what she expected me to do. But the thought of her, laughing and celebrating with her new husband, gloating about how perfectly her plan had worked, how she had finally put me in my place, it was unacceptable. I had been cast as the villain in her story, the crazy, jealous friend who committed the ultimate wedding sin. The whispers and stares had already convicted me. Running away would only confirm their verdict. No, I would not run. I would not give her the satisfaction. I had spent a small fortune on this dress, a dress she had chosen, and I was going to wear it. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. I smoothed the front of the crepe gown, the fabric cool and heavy against my trembling hands. I took a deep, steadying breath, lifted my chin, and began to walk. Not towards the exit, but towards the reception. I was no longer the supporting actress. I was no longer the victim. I didn't know what I was exactly, but I knew one thing for certain. Isabella's perfect day was not over yet. Walking onto the terrace was like stepping onto a stage. The cocktail reception was in full swing. A vibrant scene of laughter, clinking glasses, and upbeat music from a live jazz trio. All of it stopped as I appeared in the archway. The chatter died down, the music seemed to falter, and once again, I was the sole focus of 200 pairs of eyes. But this time I didn't flinch. I let their stares wash over me, a silent judgment I no longer accepted. I walked calmly to the bar at the far end of the terrace. The crowd parted for me as if I were royalty, or perhaps a leper. The whispers followed me, a wave of speculation and scandal. There she is again. She's actually staying? What is she thinking? I ignored them all. I ordered a glass of champagne from a bartender whose eyes were wide with a mixture of professional courtesy and sheer astonishment. I took a slow, deliberate sip, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue, my gaze sweeping over the opulent party. Her party. And then I saw her. Isabella was standing near the center of the terrace, holding court with Liam by her side. She was laughing, her head tilted back, the picture of bridal bliss. But her eyes were scanning the crowd, and I knew she was looking for me. When she finally saw me, her laughter died in her throat. Her smile tightened, and a flash of pure fury crossed her face before being instantly replaced by a mask of wounded concern. She leaned in and whispered something to Liam. His head whipped around, and his eyes locked on me. His expression was no longer one of simple confusion. It was hardening into anger and disapproval. Of course, she was already spinning the narrative, painting me as the unhinged friend who had lost her mind. Showtime. With Liam in tow, she began to walk towards me, her movements stiff with indignation. This was the scene she had wanted, but on her terms, not mine. She was coming to publicly banish me to complete her performance as the wronged, benevolent bride. "Eleanor," she began, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I am so disappointed in you. I can't believe you would try to ruin my day like this. After everything, wearing a white gown, what were you thinking?" I took another calm sip of my champagne, holding her gaze over the rim of the glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke with a quiet clarity that cut through the air. "I was thinking about your text message, Isabella." She froze, her carefully constructed mask faltering for a second. What are you talking about?" Liam stepped forward slightly, protective. "Izzy told me you've been acting strangely. Look, whatever is going on, this is not the time or the place. I turned my gaze to him, my expression one of cool pity. Isn't it? I think it's the perfect time and place. Your wife, the woman who just promised to be loyal and honest, sent me a text a month ago. She told me she was having a special white wedding. She insisted that all the guests wear white. She called it a divine idea. Do you remember that, Isabella? A sea of white celebrating our love? Isabella's face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. You're delusional, she hissed, her voice low and venomous now that the audience couldn't hear. I smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. Am I? I even sent you a photo of this very dress from the boutique. Your exact words were, and I quote, "Elle, it's perfect. You look like a goddess. Buy it immediately." You were so enthusiastic. I have to hand it to you. It was a brilliant trap. You knew I'd trust you. You knew I'd spend a fortune on a dress to honor your special request. You counted on my humiliation. You wanted me to show up looking like a desperate fool who was trying to upstage the bride. Liam looked from my face to his wife's, his brow furrowed in a deep, troubled line. Izzy, is this true? Why would you do that? Isabella's composure finally shattered. Her eyes blazed with a lifetime of resentment. She's always been like this. She spat, gesturing at me wildly. Always trying to compete with me, to steal my moment. I knew she'd do something to make today about her, so I just helped her along. It was a confession, raw and ugly, and it hung in the air between the three of us. Liam looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time. The radiant bride was gone, replaced by a stranger with a twisted, hateful face. The foundation of his perfect day, of his perfect love, had just crumbled into dust. I looked at Isabella, at the wreck of her triumph, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound and empty sense of finality. Our friendship hadn't died today. It had been dead for years. I just hadn't been willing to see the body. You didn't help me along, Isabella, I said, my voice still quiet. You just showed me exactly who you are. And you know what? The dress you're wearing, it really is perfect. I gave her one last look, then turned to Liam. Congratulations on your wedding day. I placed my half-empty champagne glass on a passing tray. Then, with my head held high, I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, my steps even and measured, through the silent, staring crowd. I walked out of the terrace, out of the grand estate, and out of her life. I didn't look back. The weight of our toxic friendship, a burden I had carried for years without even realizing it, lifted from my shoulders with every step. I got in my car, and as I drove away, I finally let the tears fall. But they were not tears of shame or humiliation. They were tears of grief for a sister I had lost long ago, and tears of relief for the woman I had just reclaimed.